In 1828, a 19-year-old country employee arrived in New Orleans for the first time. He had never before seen such a large city. The gorgeous structures and the huge ships stationed in the harbor fascinated him. Then he noticed a different scene. He couldn't get the scene out of his head. He observed that there was a market in the city where people were being bought and sold. Humans were a commodity that could be purchased. Human in chains and captivity were being dragged to the ships or exiting them. The times and places of the human auctions were freely publicized because it was such a horrible practice. Advertisements also include information on the precise quantity of men, women, and kids up for sale. These advertisements demanded that customers pay cash to purchase slaves. Simply put, credit was not permitted. The irony was that they were all African Americans. Blacks had been held as slaves in America by whites. These young peasants had been observing the sale of people in the market. Although he didn't like it, he was powerless to change it, due to the fact that he was a regular employee of a small boat. But he assured his partner that if given the chance, he would shut down this enterprise. The peasant, aged 19, had such a lofty aspiration. But in order to realize this desire, he had to be the strongest man alive, and in the end, he was successful.
What's up everyone, and welcome to our YouTube and Facebook channel. If you are watching our channel for the first time, please consider subscribing. And if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up. This is a 3-part video series about complete history of Abraham Lincoln. Why he was called Honest Abe, what was his first job, why did he challenge a wrestling champion, who was his first love, and how did he become US President. So let me tell you who was Abraham Lincoln. The beautiful tiny town of New Salem is located on the banks of Sangamon River. The first 6 years of Abraham Lincoln's youth were spent here, and it was in this situation that he suffered from his worst failures. However, he had never been really successful before. He was always being played by fate. His mother passed away from a deadly herb in her milk when he was 9 years old. His stepmother was then brought for him by his father. Although he never had a good relationship with his father, he wasn't unhappy with his stepmother. Instead, he had no respect for his father at all. His father also thrashed and made fun of him. He was solely literate in reading and writing, and he had memorized passages from Bible and poetry by Shakespeare. But he was never good at math, computation, and puzzles. His face had odd, ugly cuts, and he wasn't even attractive. He had a terrible accent and could not speak English well. His height was the only striking aspect of his personality. He stood at 6 feet 4 inches. It helped that he was tall. His dialogues was also excellent at this point. Friends, this is the log cabin that you see in New Salem. Abraham Lincoln started working as a storekeeper here. In New Salem, there was roughly 100 people living. These locals eventually became his clients. There were also people navigating the river who stopped to make few purchases. The shop offered candles, miniature wine bottles, and some kitchenware. Lincoln had bad luck though. He had moved to New Salem in quest of a better job. But a few months in, he lost that job because Lincoln was fired and the store was shuttered owing to financial losses. This was his first failure. Lincoln's first 9 months in New Salem was a disaster, but he still managed to achieve some amount of success. Honest Abe became his trademark. A woman once purchased some items from Lincoln's shop. When she left, Lincoln became aware that the shop weights were wrong. Some appeared lighter than they actually were. Lincoln then delivered more goods to a woman's house. This incident happened as well as numerous others. Due to these occurrences, Lincoln became known as Honest Abe. Lincoln was encouraged to run in 1832 state election by his popularity. He believed that he would receive every vote cast in New Salem. He also expected more votes from the surrounding areas. He therefore had confidence in his ability to win the elections. But despite this stellar reputation, he ended up losing. He had failed twice before. However, he was prepared to handle more failures due to his strong nature. After losing the elections, 23-year-old Lincoln was left without money or food. He made a living by working his physical strength. He started splitting rails. He was then given the recommendation to work as a postman, and he did so. However, it wasn't enough. He then decided to become a surveyor. However, he was unable to find fulfillment in this position. He then issued a challenge to New Salem wrestling champion. But even there, he fell short. According to rumors, he purposely lost to the goodwill of the wrestling champion and his buddies, and he was successful in winning their friendship. These young men supported him politically and grew to be his personal friends, along with the wrestling champion. But for his financial requirements, this friendship was useless. But collaboration was conceivable. As a result, he and William Barry, a friend, created the Barry Lincoln Store. He started the political career after starting a business. In 1834, he won the election for state assembly. In a life filled with failures, this was his first success. But his financial issues were still unresolved, despite his accomplishments. He received $3 per day while the parliament was in session. However, that was it. He neglected his store because of his political activity. The most difficult year of his life was 1835. First, William Barry, his business partner and personal friend, passed away. The shop was thereafter shut. The $1,800 debt owned by the store. In 15 years, Lincoln settled his loan. He made a joke about calling it the national debt. But Anne Rutledge was the only one who seriously hurt him. Anne was a New Salem resident when Lincoln first met her in his shop. Lincoln was in a relationship with Anne because she was so attractive. The girl, however, was engaged to someone else. Psychologists claim that it is challenging to recover from love after it has been lost. Lincoln and Anne frequently hung around in front of and inside of his store. They spoke for several hours. They also connected on the river's bank. But soon after, tragedy struck them. Typhoid caused the death of Anne Rutledge. The exact location of the cabin where Lincoln last saw her is marked on his board. There was a banyan tree close by as well. Lincoln cried hysterically under that tree as she passed away. Lincoln experienced 3 failures in a single year. One of these setbacks left him severely wounded. Throughout his life, Lincoln made frequent trips to Anne's grave. He left 2 years after Anne and William Barry passed away. He moved to neighboring town of Springfield after giving his friends in New Salem a final farewell. The town of his teenage dreams. New Salem was in any case coming to an end. Residents anticipated that steamboats would travel down the Sangamon River, turning town into a trading hub. However, cleaning the Sangamon River was impossible. Therefore, steamboats could not use it. Within 3 years of Lincoln's departure, the small town was empty. Lincoln never visited New Salem again, but he occasionally went to Anne Rutledge's grave. Lincoln's life was changed when he arrived in Springfield. He practiced law in Springfield, earning a comfortable living while gradually paying off his debts. He was also in love with and wed Mary Todd, a wealthy woman. From there, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives and spent 2 years in Washington. But the appeal of everything quickly faded, considering that he never forgot seeing black slaves being sold in the markets. His own party, the Whig Party, did not support his desire to speak out against slavery. His political ideas also turned off his supporters. He left politics as a result of this disappointment. He was mainly concerned with his legal business. He spent his free time with his family. He completely lost track of his stepmother and father. Abraham Lincoln might have gone through life in oblivion, but a controversy was erupting in the US as Lincoln was stepping out from politics. Whether or not to eliminate black slavery was a topic of discussion. There were 2 different regions of the United States at the time. Agriculture was essential to southern state economics. People in these states employed slaves as farm laborers. In exchange, slaves received a permanent home and food. Black slaves therefore proved to be less expensive labor than white workers. But there was an industrial revolution taking place in northern states. Factories was taking the places of fields. A middle class developed as a result of the numerous white people who worked in factories. This class interest was now centered in the factory rather than the field. If factory owners were permitted to employ slaves in their facilities, it would be simple for them to hire slave labor. The white people had no employment in the situation. Therefore, it was a moral and financial issue. Because of this, the majority of white residents of northern states favored the legal end of slavery nationwide. During the 1850s, support of slavery increased in the South as opposition to it grew in northern states. Eventually, the intensity got to the point where it started to get physical. In 1850s, the American Civil War had already started. Now both supporters and opponents of slavery started murdering one another. The Bible was cited both in favor of and against slavery. Given these conditions, Lincoln decided to put his advocacy work on hold and return to politics. A crowd was present in the market to hear Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas speak. In his speech, Senator Douglas defended slavery. Blacks were not treated equally to white in his eyes. He was arguing that white Americans have the freedom to choose whether or not to keep black slaves in their states. Lincoln got up after Stephen Douglas finished speaking. "Tomorrow I'll tell you how crude Senator Douglas' arguments are," he said to the crowd. Since Springfield residents knew Lincoln, they showed up the following day to hear his speech. Lincoln argued against slavery for 3 hours. Douglas' arguments, according to him, was only persuasive if people didn't view black people as having human rights. According to him, no one could decide to hold black people as slaves if they were human beings. Black people are also free and human. Many people were moved by Lincoln's point of view. Lincoln then delivered several anti-slavery remarks in upcoming talks. When it came to civil rights activists, he gained more and more support. At the time, the Republican Party was founded by anti-slavery American lawmakers and Lincoln's former Whig Party was ready to collapse. Lincoln joined the new group of people. He attempted to run for the Senate in 1858 on the platform of his newly formed party. In the elections, he came up against his longtime rival, Stephen Douglas. Lincoln made the decision to dominate in public debates. He sent a debating invitation to Douglas. In light of that, Douglas agreed to take on the task. 7 3-hour-long discussions between Lincoln and Douglas took place in several Illinois cities. Douglas was a chubby man who was 5 feet 4 inches tall. Lincoln was 6 feet 4 inches tall, and he had a thin build. People would smile whenever they entered the stage because of the difference in their heights. Many people began referring to Douglas and Lincoln as the Little Giant and Long Abe. Thousands of people watched their discussions, during which hawkers also made a lot of money. They offered Lincoln and Douglas name badges for sale. Many people came to attend these renowned arguments, but another revolution was also happening in the background, a media revolution, newspaper journalism. When the telegraph was in use during the time of Abraham Lincoln, news was distributed a lot more quickly. Short tales were written by reporters in Shortland and sent to the office via telegraph machines. That information would be printed using presses. Then train would transport them to every region of the country. Additionally, the camera has been created. Reporters consequently snapped photos and printed them in newspapers. It was brand new to the world. News about Lincoln and his debate were circulated by this media. People who supported slavery read Douglas' comments, and those who opposed it enjoyed reading Lincoln's. These arguments was raised in private conversations. Lincoln was defeated by Douglas in race for the Senate. Yet, despite the loss, his name has come to represent the fight against African slavery in the US. He had grown to be so well known that he occasionally considered as a candidate for the US presidency. It goes without saying that someone who recently lost an election could not possibly imagine being nominated as a candidate for president. But he eventually had to do this in his head. Illinois, his home state, was the first to propose him for president. His name was given serious consideration for the party nomination at the National Convention in Chicago. and that was the location where a candidate's name would be decided. Due to their defeat in previous presidential election, this new party required a candidate to win. Now they would do anything to see their president in the White House. The Chicago Convention including a discussion over Lincoln's name. Other candidates were also brought up, but Lincoln stood out since no one was against him. After great deliberation, it was decided that the US presidential nomination should consist of a failed senator, a failed businessman, and a failed lover. When nomination was announced, Abraham Lincoln was not present. At his house, hundreds of miles away, he was playing handball. Upon hearing the news, neighbors gathered in front of his home to offer their congratulations. People were joyfully chanting slogans, just like winning an election. Getting the Republican nomination was difficult, because the Democrats were unable to produce a single candidate who was approved. The Democrat, in contrast, had two candidates. Senator Stephen Douglas, a former rival of Abraham Lincoln, and John Breckinridge, a representative of southern states, were the first and second. Lincoln benefited enormously from Democratic Party fragmentation. The voting day was November 6, 1860. All around the country, people were casting their votes. But surprisingly, Lincoln received almost no support in southern states. On the ballot, not even his name was present. However, Lincoln prevailed in the end. Interestingly, he received 300,000 fewer votes than the two Democratic candidates combined. But it was clear that they were split. Lincoln was chosen as a new president after receiving 180 electoral votes from 18 states, according to the US Electoral College system. When Lincoln was elected president, his nation broke apart. The slave-holding southern states rebelled against Lincoln's victory and declared their independence. They established the Confederate State of America as a separate state. Senator Davis was chosen as the first president of the United States, which had its own flag and assembly. Even before he took the oath of office, time presented Lincoln with the largest task in American history. But before he could accept this challenge, he had to take the oath. He initially had to drive more than 1,600 miles to Washington, D.C., where he took the oath. However, there were anti-slavery and anti-Lincoln groups scattered along the 1,600 miles journey. If Lincoln did not resign and travel to Washington to take the oath, they threatened to murder him. But then, the only means of transportation were steam-powered railways. There were no aeroplanes. His deadly opponents were waiting for him with weapons along the road. Then what happened? How did Lincoln reach Washington? How seriously did Abraham Lincoln live up to his promise to end slavery after assuming the presidency, or become a victim of expediency? Why did the media go against him? And why did Lincoln fire several generals, including his army chief? What was the decision that made Lincoln one of the greatest leaders in history? So guys, we'll show you all this, but in the second part of Who Was Abraham Lincoln.